Welcome to the ECHORIFT Show. I'm Don.
And I'm Mike.
And we are the creators of ECHORIFT Comics.
And that's me, isn't it? Yes?
Yes.
Take a deep breath, Don. This time on ECHORIFT, the boys talk about Peter Capaldi's... I guess we're starting over.
That's cool. I'll edit this out. Don't leave Audacity be.
Okay, so we're gonna just start over.
Yeah, well, we'll just start with you doing your next time on ECHORIFT part, or whatever. This time on ECHORIFT, however you want to start.
So what was the line you said there?
I said, I have to bring it up. I don't have both up. I said, and we're the creators of ECHORIFT Comics.
Okay. And this time on ECHORIFT, the boys talk about Doctor Who. Deep breath.
The first episode of Peter Capaldi's reign set a record of broadcasting for BBC America with 2.6 million viewers. It was the biggest premiere for Doctor Who in England since 2010, and it had almost double the audience of the 50th anniversary episode.
Pivotal, Don.
I'd say that Peter Capaldi put rear ends in seats.
Yes, Don. In fact, I think he got people out of their graves to watch it.
I think I'm going to go on record here saying I think this is one of the best, if not the best, first episode for a Doctor for a number of different reasons. But I may go back and see others and maybe question it because Robot's pretty good and some of the other ones. But I don't think any first Doctor Who episode has ever been this well knitted to the previous Doctor and to going forward and anything. Like I was just thrilled by it.
Yeah, this one had to operate on levels that no Doctor Who episode has ever had to operate on, and we don't need to discuss almost any details of the story because they're really, we can of course, but they're almost inconsequential to me. For instance, the very first image of the story is the sky and a dinosaur's head jutting into frame.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is not how I wanted Doctor Who to start off.
Yeah. And
it seemed cheesy, and it almost seemed sort of typical of things about the current incarnation of Doctor Who, the modern one that I haven't loved, and then very quickly, and of course by the end, it's this very complicated story, basically a subtext of how the series survives and becomes something new and something old again.
Yeah, and it does it with this excellent story that sort of parallels. I mean, the A story, the A plot is this sort of invasion of England, like the typical episode, and then the B plot is this sort of, but the A plot is also about change and not adapting to change and all these other things, and then the B plot, which is obviously the Doctor's first appearance, in this form, is the exact same story, and it's really great. And one of the things that I think is really daring and cool and just everything I really like when Stephen Moffat is right. I love him. And it's this whole concept of the entire episode. He's written Clara to be the character that everyone's worried and maybe indeed be out there who doesn't want a young, handsome boyfriend Doctor. And he had the guts sort of to write her that way and be able to speak to that audience member in the form of Clara throughout the entire episode and have the Doctor speak to that audience member. And that is probably the best, I don't know what the right word is, subtext, theme, something that Doctor Who has ever pulled off in any of its modern incarnation.
Well, when has any television show really ever had to address its audience almost like, in a lot of ways, it was almost like he was doing a press conference.
Yeah,
somebody disguised it as an episode. I was a fan, and you were a fan, obviously, of Doctor Who back when it was on a PBS show. It's funny, I was going to this bar one night in a kind of a seedy part of town.
As you're wont to do.
Yeah. No, but it's a new bar in a kind of an area that's not the greatest. it's a nice place and everything. It's not like some den of iniquity. But so I had to park in kind of an area that I wasn't entirely comfortable, and then I had to walk through an area I wasn't entirely comfortable with. And this gentleman stopped me, and he looked like he had been living on the streets. And I knew that he was going to ask me for money, and so I was like sort of hardening to that fact, like that I was going to be asked for money. I was going to have to make a decision, and I wasn't threatened by him. But he goes, "Oh man, hey, can I ask you a question?" And he goes, "That's a really cool shirt. What is it?" I said, "It's Doctor Who." And he goes, "Doctor Who?" And I go, "You probably don't know it." He goes, "Yeah, it used to be on PBS." And it occurred to me, and I felt bad for this guy. I mean, as you can imagine, it occurred to me that guy has no idea that Doctor Who's more popular now than it's ever been. And he
Yeah.
had my memories of Doctor Who. So I gave him some money.
The
But
best way to get money out of Mike is to relate to his childhood
but
and
now
present.
and what's funny is I've been complimented on that exact same shirt to the point where I'm almost uncomfortable wearing it because it was always compliments from like girls that could almost be my daughters.
Right.
And I couldn't. I was after the 50th episode, which I loved. There had been this fever pitch on the internet and the circles that I was wandering in on the internet of fandom that I couldn't relate to in any way. Not just because like I'm old and they were young, because they were male and female, but there was as you can imagine, a tremendous female audience, and it was all very lovey-dovey. Again, it might have been males, it was definitely females, and it was sort of like 17 magazine, and
Yeah.
I was it actually irritated me, and I was angry with them and was convinced they weren't real fans and all this, and and this episode made me feel very differently towards those people, which I'm grateful for.
That's cool.
It
That's
it
cool to hear.
it really, because it occurred to me what they're going to have to grapple with, and that Stephen Moffat would recognize that and need to reintroduce them to the idea that this has existed for a long time, and that he took a shape for you. It made me care about those fans in a way that I was incapable of
Yeah, I mean,
during the hiatus between this season and the last one.
it might even be a thing where I'm trying to think of another example, but like I'm sure there are other examples, maybe related to music or rock and roll or something, where I have friends like I have a friend Dog Teeth that's on, you can find him on Twitter, and there have been times where I know I've held really strong opinions about music and things, and he's older than me, and he every now and then would just sort of like, you're young, and sort of have this like very cool sort of recognition, and I almost feel like to the extent that I felt the same way you did. I almost feel like this is my first sort of appearance to that, of like suddenly realizing the like, well, this is how you were introduced to Doctor Who. This is Doctor Who to you. It's not your fault that you don't know the old stuff. And then to have it change is, if someone were to say, I don't get this, it's not really a flaw of theirs. Like they're kind of in their world. This is a change for them, and if they really do love Doctor Who, and it seems like they do, it's a change they're going to embrace and come to learn, even if, like the character Clara, they're a little reluctant at first.
Yeah, it's funny how just how beautifully written it all was. I mean, those are it's funny. These are the only things I want to talk about. The episode had some cool new monsters and some great laying of groundwork for the season's new mystery.
Yeah, yeah,
And some pretty cool, like one of the things I liked, mythologically is the mythology is the idea that his face is one that he's seen before and that he selected.
yeah, yeah,
And the idea of face selection has become something that was introduced in the 50th anniversary because pretty much David Tennant regenerated into himself.
right,
Right? I mean, that
exactly,
was
yeah,
established for us. And then apparently the librarian is the last incarnation of the Doctor, or a future one, who chose to be Tom Baker's face again.
Yeah, and I always hoped that they, and no one would, particularly Stephen Moffat, but Russell Davies as well, what original series nerds those guys are. And there, if you remember that one episode where Mary Tam quit, who played Romana, and so they had to decide how how to replace her. And there's this whole sequence of her like choosing her bodies and stuff. And I always thought that was neat, and I always understood. And I think there was even mythology as to why the Doctor can never control his regeneration, and it was because Romana was in a calm situation so she could concentrate, where the Doctor always regenerates because he's about to die, so he never has time to think. And I thought it was neat that they were able to take that back and apply that to him and add some gravity to it that really wasn't there before. Before, it was always this sort of the shock of who will I be next. And this still has that, but this episode explicitly explains that the previous Doctor was very aware of what he was doing, yet he wasn't. It's almost like dreamy. Like you almost get the feeling, you almost start to feel like you can feel like he does when he's regenerating, almost like you could wish, wish, wish. I mean, maybe it even goes back to the Ginger reference when Matt Smith first becomes the Doctor and he wanted to be Ginger. Is that in hindsight, and it probably wasn't intended at the time, but in hindsight, was it because David Tennant incarnation was thinking redhead, redhead, redhead when it happened and it just didn't work out that time? Like, it adds such a cool concept to such a really far out comic booky element of Doctor Who. I mean, Doctor Who has a lot of that stuff, but I mean, the regeneration thing is really out there.
Yeah, I just was so impressed with the writing. There's one point when talking about the idea of the faces being selected. There's one point when, is it Lady Vastra?
Yeah, yeah.
She's talking to Clara and she says, why do you think he chose that face, and as in the young face, and then the answer was to be accepted, and then a moment later Vastra leaves and Clara's talking to her
Jenny, yeah,
Jenny, her wife, and she says, she says that she loves Vastra, and she mentions, she goes, we're not even the same species or something like that. And she explains that that's why, that it's love, it's not appearance.
yeah.
And it's another example where I was kind of moved by it because it actually spoke to me too, and it made me again feel for these young fans that I hope we all move forward as fans together, because now I'm getting back something I wanted, which is the Doctor as a mad scientist old man, and I was convinced that's who he was, and the reality is maybe he's we've seen him now almost just as often not that. And that if you love Doctor Who, well, you'll love him through those things. And keeping in mind, Matt Smith's my favorite Doctor.
Yeah.
So it's not, that wasn't even a big deal to me. It was like not loving what Doctor Who, the TV show, had become, and somehow its fandom had become. But I have so much empathy for them now. Like I really hope that this episode was exactly what they needed to hear to make them comfortable still being fans.
Well, and it also shames them a tiny bit. I mean, I was thinking that because I ended up watching it twice, and I was thinking he's not only communicating with them, but he is a little bit shaming them if they reject the show. Because in like that sequence you just thought about, I wrote down. I actually wrote down the what's said because it's so powerful. Vastra says he looked like your dashing young friend, but he's the Doctor. And then she says he looked young. Oh no, I'm sorry. This is all Vastra. He looked young, but who do you think that was for? And Clara says me. And then she says, well, everyone. And then Vastra says, well, what reason? And Vastra says the oldest reason there is to be accepted. And it's like it's reaching right through the screen and saying whether they were great doctors or not, very particularly Matt Smith. I wouldn't even count David Tennant. I think David Tennant gets lumped in by being the one before Matt Smith and having two young doctors in a row. But it was about Doctor Who tipping and becoming as popular as it is for a niche product. I mean, you could compare it to CSI and say, well, 2.6 million. No, it's Doctor Who. The fact that you can go into a mall and buy Doctor Who stuff, that's insane. So it's huge. I don't think it could get any bigger considering the niche product that it is. And it had a lot to do with the fact that this dashing young square jawed guy was running around and doing all that stuff, and before him the crazy haired clothes horse was running around,
Well,
and now gets back to being what made it last 50 years. In fact, I think there was even a reference to that extent. Like, how do you think he survived this long? It wasn't by running around like a young man.
yeah, she talks about him having watched stars die or whatever. But what she was saying there essentially was the show's been on since the 60s. For
Yeah,
all
yeah,
intents and purposes. The analogies were so great because they were so perfect. I mean, they worked in the universe of the Doctor, and they also worked in the universe of Doctor Who, a TV show, and with a mythology and a rich history that matters. That that doesn't stop mattering and doesn't change forever into something else. But what is particularly exciting to me is the idea that that was just addressed. Like, can you imagine the complexity of that writing? So he has to write a story that works, and he has to show Clara's reaction to the Doctor, and the show veers pretty dark at points. I mean, the
yeah.
Doctor is sort of the character that you're afraid of. And that fans might be afraid of, that he's not the character that they loved and just felt warm and cuddly with, and then that Clara could turn on him, like her sort of ugly side of not being able to accept what he looks like and how he's acting. It's really one of the first times we've seen a companion. It might be the first time. I mean, I know that there were complicated when the Fifth Doctor turned into the Sixth Doctor.
Yeah, yeah.
I know that was complicated, but I don't think it ever veered this dark for the companion's reaction to the Doctor.
Yeah, because Perry was just frightened, and he was even, and that doctor was deliberately threatening to let her die and kill her and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was the closest it ever came, and this is more subtle and real feeling than that. And the things about that I love, like I love that along with the like you said, the return of the older Doctor. The other thing that this episode very explicitly does is it closes the door on the Doctor and the companion having a love interest in one another. I mean, it doesn't just compose it, it doesn't close it, because there's always a chance someone could hope for some kind of May-December romance. And the Doctor, when he says to her, Clara, I'm not your boyfriend, and she says, oh, I never said you were. And he said, I'm not saying it was your mistake. And then, like, but he's very, like, their relationship, in those moments, he's tender and he's almost not quite grandfatherly, but like great uncle-y. And then the rest of the time, the hysterical banter that they have with one another, where they're sort of arguing and calling each other names and stuff, it's going to make for a great show, because the Doctor and Donna had a little bit of that, but they didn't completely. It was a different kind. But there's a lot of room to be explored in Doctor Who of having that, and that's one of the reasons Donna's one of my favorite companions of all time. Is I love that they had that sort of different relationship with one another. And they weren't. It was not romantic, and all these other things. And the idea of being able to return to that and experiment with that more with a guy, and Capaldi has huge comedy chops for my kind of comedy, no less. So I really look forward to all that.
I think it was cool too that they addressed something that, and again, this goes back to why I really feel empathy, and I'm excited about the idea of all of us marching forward as fans. Is I've gotten certainly to see the show that the new audiences love. I mean, like, it had reached a fever pitch of what they love. And to see it take such a stark turn, I mean, from a capitalism standpoint, it's unacceptable what Moffat did.
Yeah,
To make the Doctor an old man, like to take something that was working beautifully. Like in America, we wouldn't let that happen. We would have thrown more money at Matt Smith and made it impossible for him to leave, and ran the show out until it died, and then hopefully replaced him with a more adorable character. So to have the freedom that they do, because it's, their system is obviously different because it's still largely government funded, right?
Yeah, I mean, it stepped away from that, but for all intents and purposes, it is. It's not commercial driven. That's the important thing.
They don't have to worry about the same things that we have to here.
It's more like HBO.
Yeah. So, but the idea that would be taken just in any capacity, that a risk like that would be taken for something that viewership matters, is again a testament to what Doctor Who has been. That it's more than just a TV show. It's more than just a really popular TV show. That it's a tradition, now around the world, but certainly in Britain. And I love the part where he says. There's sort of the debate going on where Clara's like, well, I wasn't just attracted to him or whatever. And my big argument towards like the teeny bopper fandom was you just like this pretty face. And that was it's unfair to say that's all they cared about.
Right.
But it was also true that they would have readily denied that and claimed to be
Or
big
they
Doctor Who
or they
science
might
fiction
never
fans.
or they might never have even watched the show if it hadn't at least been they hadn't at least been brought in
Well, that's what I'm
by
saying.
handsome people.
So a certain amount of truth to both our arguments, and it was so great that the show would point that out, like that it would place that challenge within a narrative. Again, just he has been able to do brilliant things. And did you get to watch any of the little specials? Like I bought it on iTunes, and there's some different little specials that come with the season.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw there was like 6 of them, but I haven't watched any of them because when I got the chance to watch the Deep Breath a second time, I didn't want to risk running out of time to watch it because my bedtime was coming.
Well,
And but I do want to see those.
wait till you see probably any of them, but there's one that's hosted by oh gosh, the Fifth Doctor. What's his name?
Peter Davison.
Peter Davison. And he goes and he meets several of the old companions, and they are talking about the Doctor. And there's a couple points throughout where they talk about their true excitement for Doctor Who as an old man again, because it's what they remember.
Yeah.
And it's cool to be sitting alongside essentially people that are part of the mythology, part of the history of the show, and having them remember Doctor Who the way we do, which is this is really exciting for us. Like, as much as I've loved the show, I mean, I think the show has reached a caliber that is unparalleled by the show that came before it. I mean, the emotional content of the show, the production values, the writing is better than it was in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, without a doubt.
In my opinion, it's a far superior show. But it had stepped away from some of its traditions, and I'm glad to see that there'll be a marriage of those, and that they'll be able to do a young guy again. I mean, they might even do a woman. A part of me hopes they don't do a woman because my sense is that Doctor Who's an old man. I mean, call me old-fashioned, but he's an old guy. Maybe he won't be at some point in the future, and then I'll have to grapple with that. But I love that I can be friends with the current fans.
I think the thing with a woman doctor to me is after 12 regenerations and at least one other actor who's played the doctor, it would just feel too much like a stunt to me. Like I think that I mean, okay, fine, I'm the nerd. Like there were people that, like the highfalutin reviewers who were talking about how the episode was goofy and silly in terms of its like storyline. I'm thinking, then why are you watching Doctor Who? Because I mean, you kind of have to recognize that Doctor Who, it's one of the reasons I love it, is it's a lot like a comic book. I mean, it just does things.
Did they miss the subtext of it?
They might have. I didn't waste time reading them. I mean, I just saw the bylines.
The subtext of it was so fantastic. I mean, the story almost never veers away from addressing this pivotal point in the show's history. It's more pivotal than when the show came back.
Yeah, I think so too, and it's certainly better. But I mean, all the way down to
the moment in time for the show's history.
Yeah,
in this episode is the greatest sort of climax of where the show has been and can go.
Yeah, no, and it really, and the fact that it was able to do that and also be an interesting, because I have a whole feeling about First Doctor episodes, and I think that the last 2 have been really strong, but usually they're not that good. And I love that this one and the last one has been. But you're right, and it's funny, as you were talking about the risk taking of like from the capitalism standpoint, it hit me that Clara probably isn't just speaking to Tumblr. He's also speaking to the BBC and if they have investors or whatever, because he's sort of by making that point of like, this show didn't get to be as old as it is or get to where it is because it relies on a certain type of actor being in the role. You know, and he needs to have that flexibility, which again loops back to, but at the same time, when you strike a pattern for 50 years, it's just, I'm not saying I wouldn't accept it and wouldn't end up really enjoying it. And there's a part of me that loves what if stories. So the the flat old idea of the doctor regenerating into to a woman doesn't bother me, but the mythology element of it is, why did it take this long? How does it not feel like a stunt? And just like the idea of sort of casting Capaldi as the antithesis of a stunt, it's sort of going back to your roots. It would make it feel even more, because I've always contended that the young thing really does relate a lot to the fact that they put two young actors back to back. I mean, that a third young actor in a row would have been a pattern. It would have been an expectation, and they had to break it as soon as they could if they ever want the flexibility to go back to having a young man or an older man or a middle-aged man. I mean, most of them are middle-aged. I mean, I ended up getting, and we'll talk about that in a moment, I ended up getting a list of the ages of all the doctors, the actors who played the doctor. And when they started with Eccleston, they went right in the middle of the pack. I mean, there are like 7 of the other actors who played the doctor were younger than him when he started. And the idea that they did that, and then, the other things, and Tennant isn't that young. I mean, he's only the 3rd youngest actor. So anyway, it's just cool. I mean, we're sort of just saying it over and over again, but it's that important to me that I'm so excited that they brought this older actor in, and that he's
Well,
just done such a great job.
Eccleston, Eccleston had a lot of sex appeal going for him. I mean, he's running around in black leather. He has a definitive romantic connection with with Rose.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no arguing that the show hadn't taken on a romantic
soap opera. Yeah.
So the Doctor's been young for the entire new incarnation of him. He's gotten younger in each regeneration, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he has. Yeah.
What I love, there's an element. There's one moment in this episode that every time, well, I've seen it 3 times now. There's a scene where the doctor is sleeping, and Clara's listening to him talk, and just listen to his voice in that. I love the sound of the human voice, but he's sort of murmuring, and she thinks he's translating the dinosaur. She goes, "You're translating," and he's saying, "I'm so alone," and he says several things, and they could be the dinosaur. And they probably are the dinosaur, but they're also the doctor.
Yeah, I mean, particularly with the way the episode ends.
He's describing his situation, how despairing he is. Like, he may or may not be translating. I also thought it was cool that there's a scene where he's holding up a pie plate or something in front of the bad guy at the end.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's reflecting both their faces when the camera switches, and he says, "You don't even know how you got that face or why you chose that face," referring to the face that guy put on himself.
It's
a reminder again. I love how they're focused on that idea. And I went back and did some research on that old episode where Capaldi had been in it.
Yeah, the fires of Pompeii.
And the doctor spares that family only at the request of his companion, Donna. And I just wonder if there's that survivor is like essentially the only survivors of Pompeii. I mean, not every single person died in Pompeii, from what I understand in true history, but the doctor saves this family, and I'm just wondering, there's parallels just between that relationship of being preserved and being the last of your kind.
And Moffat does a really good job of never, he does a good job of giving me the ability to speculate, because that's part of the fun of being a Doctor Who fan, is guessing what's going to happen next. And he also does a good job of I'm rarely right. And it struck me, because one of the things that I love, and we've been not dancing around it, we've talked around it, but this is a very specific thing I love, is there's at least one, and I think there might even be more than one reference to the fact that he chose this body and face because he's going to need it. Now, it's not that. Now, the fact that Peter Capaldi is older does not mean that he's wiser, because the Doctor's 2,000 years old no matter what body he's in. And granted, he may exhibit different behavior, like everybody. And I think it's a very apt description to call Matt Smith's Doctor, like to compare him to Tigger, because that's the way he appears in the first episode. He's tiggering around Amy's, girl Amy's house. But it's not the fact that he's older that makes him wiser or anything, because he's still the Doctor. But the idea that he needs that face, and I was thinking the most on the nose is at some point he might need to pretend to be that person.
He said he was trying to tell himself something.
Yeah,
that the selection was intended to trigger some thought.
And the idea the idea that all that matters, the idea that they're playing into the fact, because this isn't even the first time that Colin Baker had appeared in the show before he became the Doctor, and of course Lala Ward had appeared before she became the second incarnation of Romana. So the show actually has a history of this, and it's still interesting that this is the first time they've decided to make hay with it and do something with it.
Yeah.
Before we run out of time, I do want to. One of the things I was going on, we watched it the first time together.
Don, we've got a time machine. We don't run out of time.
I was where we go, we don't need time. When we were watching the episode in that very last sequence, then they're in the street. I'm carrying on in my seat and interrupting everything, going, "He's wearing a wedding band. Why does he have a wedding band on? He's wearing a wedding band." And I read an interview because I Googled it. I'm like, I can't be the only one who noticed that. And I didn't know if it was a gaffe or whatever. And it's not a gaffe, but, and I know I'm not going to say I read maybe a little too much, but, and I'm not going to say what I read that I thought was too much to spare everyone. But what I had read was the actor had said that he knew that when he was going to start working a job this rigorous, I mean, it was like 5 months straight of shooting, he was terrified that he'd lose his wedding ring and he refused to take it off. So they worked with him. And then after that, he starts talking about things, but basically there's a thing over his wedding ring, and they just haven't drawn focus to it. But I thought that was neat that for whatever reason, I'm attuned to whether people are wearing wedding rings, and the fact that it does mean something. It's not a mistake. It's deliberate. I thought was really neat because I just love those kind of like teasers for the future of like, well, where's this going to go and what's this going to mean?
Yeah. I also like the it reminded me of like Isaac Asimov and his science fiction. I'm sure lots of mysteries will have the actors thinking about how they know something, they have an idea, and they're giving you very heavy clues to they're at the cusp of answering a question or solving a mystery. And there's a couple scenes throughout the episode where he knows what he's seeing is familiar.
Yeah.
He recognizes it, but he can't quite place it. So I'm hoping that what he's remembering is stuff that dates back to the old show. That the connections to the original series are going to be even further, reinforced.
And there's no risk there. I mean, there's no risk to the audience. The audience can either go get them on DVD or not be interested and just read about it online. And like, but whatever, it's just fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love when they do stuff like that. But yeah, I looked and I said previously on an episode that I didn't think Capaldi was necessarily that old. He is the oldest actor to play the Doctor by 1 year. Hartnell was actually, it's hard to believe looking at him, the first Doctor, if you look for a picture of him. But that was, he was a World War II vet. I mean, but he was only 55 and Capaldi's 56. And then the third Doctor is the third oldest, and it goes down from there. But anyway, I was surprised because I think I had said on a previous episode that I thought he was probably in the middle of the pack, and he's not. He's definitely the oldest man to play the part, as of the first episode. Which is cool. I mean, I think that's cool, and it's just funny. It's almost a testament to modern science or something that he doesn't look anywhere, because Hartnell looked really old, and he was a year younger, and Capaldi looks pretty vital and whatever.
It's interesting too, seeing how I guess it's just the caliber of Capaldi's acting, but I think it's cool that I felt very little of the tropes of the Doctor in his portrayal.
Yeah,
like there's a couple of points where he particularly, he goes to the trouble to manifest, the behavior of David Tennant and Matt Smith. I think it's the scene in the alleyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a couple scenes where he's doing their shtick, but his performance as the Doctor is very. It's interesting. I don't even know how to say it because Matt Smith and David Tennant were very human, but there's something really human about his portrayal.
Well, I think he's going to end up being much more low key in terms of, and now they kicked this off with Matt Smith before the seventh season, but he never does any of the big grand "I am the Doctor" speeches. In fact, it's very low key when he says something to the effect of, "My code says I won't murder, but," or no, he doesn't say that. He says, "I don't want to have to murder you." And it's interesting that he uses the word murder and that he makes himself clear. And so this Doctor, instead of having that big moment, that big "I am the Doctor" threatening bombast moment, his moment is much quieter and much more threatening, and "I don't want to have to murder you." Like that's pretty different tone, and I think it bodes really well and for interesting storytelling.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued with where they're going to take it and what he's going to be, and I like the idea that the show is going to have a darker tone than it has in the past, or maybe darker might be too strong a word, but sober.
Yeah, and I think that if they include that sort of type of comedy of him and Clara going back and forth. Before we end, what do you think of Clara? Like, do you like her?
Oh yeah, I love Clara's probably she might be my favorite companion, and there's a strength to her combined with her beauty. Like I can't stop staring at her face. Like she has a face that looks like it was created. And when I fell in love with her in the 50th anniversary episode, where they're at the most pivotal decision in the Doctor's life, and it's where the three doctors are going to fire the weapon together.
Hmm.
They're going to push the button together. And they look over at her, and we know she's the impossible girl, and she's saved the Doctor throughout history. And I love that mythology that the character has. And all she does is a tear runs down her face, and she says something to the effect of "This isn't you."
Yeah.
And to me, that summed up the entire character. Like the character has always that character has been there for him at all the right moments. And some of the rest of the time, her presence doesn't even matter. She doesn't even have to be there. Like she just goes back to her own life and everything. I don't know. Yes, to answer your question, I really like Clara.
I find I can't connect with her, and that's why I was curious if it's me. Like well, let me be clear. In her first appearance in that, when she's playing a character that she really never plays again, in that Snowman episode, I fell madly in love with her. I mean, head over heels in love with her. And then when she appears, actually before that, she appeared as the Dalek, and that I loved her in that too. And the character that she plays once she formally becomes a companion is very different from those two characters, in my opinion. Like the one is very flirty and actually they're both very flirty and bouncy and sort of Tiggery, like he is. And then when we meet her, she's much more practical, and she's still cute and funny. And again, and I agree with you, she's beautiful. But there's something about her I don't connect with, and I was just there's something like I intellectually understand all the awesome things about her, but there's just some connection that I don't have with her. But anyway, it'll be curious to see how the show develops, and I'm really anxious to see. I think that she was really strong in the scenes where the two of them are bickering, and he's calling her when he's calling her an egomaniac and stuff. Like I really like that kind of quick-witted humor, and I like that the show is adapting, because one of the things that Capaldi, if you've ever seen, if not, you should go YouTube them. Look for his portrayal in a show called The Thick of It. It's ThickE. He is an amazing a-hole, and he has a great, like, to play, like he plays an amazing, because he sounds like a really amazing individual person. um, and he's got a sense of humor that is just right out of the park. And this wasn't quite that, but it's in that realm of, it's not telling jokes and it's not being cute. It's being quick and funny. And it's one of the things I liked about David Tennant and Donna. And I really look forward to seeing that, because she played that really well. Like the being outraged, and she gives back as good as she takes without being the Amy. Like I always liked Amy, but Amy was sort of that like bossy like mode that isn't as cute or funny when she's doing that as Clara is.
Yeah, Amy seemed mean.
Yeah.
I liked Amy in one of the episodes that I found almost impossible to watch is the one where she gets stuck inside of some place where they can't reach her, where time is passing more quickly. And then there's two Amy's running around. They have to decide who they keep. And that episode had me so upset because I cared about the character, but I always found her too mean. I don't ultimately didn't understand the appeal. Like I didn't find her to be a likable human being.
Yeah, and
Um,
and I wouldn't even say. I mean, mean is probably right, but also like sort of bossy. But that's probably not right, because Donna was very bossy, and I never thought of her as mean. Because in fact, during that era of Doctor Who, it seemed like Donna was there to be the person to keep the Doctor from being mean, because that was during that storytelling phase where he was getting sick of everyone and being more hard edged and threatening.
I guess the
Um,
thing about Donna though is we got to see how Amy treated her husband slash boyfriend and the doctor.
yeah,
And I found that her treatment of those two people was mean. I
yeah.
mean, I can't come up with a better word than that. Whereas Donna was single, so we didn't get to see how she treated close relations other than like her parents, who she was. Yeah,
Yeah, and she only had the typical funny, reaction to parents, but she seemed to respect them. I think it's her mom and
yeah,
grandfather. Yeah,
And Donna was a comedic actress, and she was written that way. I mean, she had no one has had opportunities for comedy the way she did, um, which was really cool that they would have done that kind of casting and then allowed her to really run with it. Um,
I love Donna. I do think she's my favorite companion. I mean, Joe Grant is probably my favorite companion, but that's just a growing up thing, and I find her real cute and all those other things. But that's a different scale. Like when you certain things when you compare the old show, the new show, they're just completely different scales. They're hard to relate. Even a lot of times the doctors themselves. But I do think that in the modern era, Donna, I get such a joy out of her and just such a kick out of all the range of things that she does.
Donna had some of the best. Well, again, I think part of it's hard to know for sure because she had the comedic elements. So when you have comedy, your drama is tends to have a reach new levels. You know, you can
Yeah,
sort of swing the pendulum in both directions, and you can go much further. So she had some of the most intense storylines.
tragedy. Yeah, she's a very tragic character.
Yeah, and so in that respect, I mean, they really were able to do amazing things with her because of that. I mean, it goes back to that whole idea of like if you can make people laugh, you can then make them cry, and you know, you can survive both.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap this up. I think we're going to end up. I maybe will in the next few episodes. We'll at least while the doctor is running, I think we should dedicate some space to talking about what we thought, even if we decide to sort of limit ourselves and just say, hey, for a couple minutes, we're going to say what we thought of the last episode. Because I'm really excited that this is on, and I don't know, I'm excited for the show in a way that the way they were breaking up the seasons before just was killing my enthusiasm by doing the 5 episodes and then taking 6 months off or whatever. And I love that I'm pretty sure it's 13 straight episodes, and then there'll be a few weeks off, and then it'll be the Christmas special, and I'm really excited to see what happens next.
Yeah, it really is what they said back in the around the 50th anniversary is this next season was going to figure out how to make the Doctor last another 50 years, and I think what the moves have been bold and brilliant, and at a minimum, that's not boring.
Yeah, and I really am going to be interested to see how they take that challenge. I mean, to renew the show. I mean, how seriously does he take that? I mean, there's a mysterious character introduced in this episode, and I don't know. I think it's going to be just a really cool ride in a way that you can really only get when you bring in a new Doctor.
This has been an Echo Rift production. Go to echorift.com to learn more.